we have the next panel, The Future of Ride-Hailing Shared Mobility. And it's going to be moderated by Harry Campbell, who is the CEO and founder, the rideshare guy. I like that. Come on up.
All right, thank you for that introduction, and thank you to everyone for joining. As mentioned, I'm the founder of an online media business called The Rideshare Guy. That's a blog, podcast, YouTube channel, course, and book. Lots of content for Uber and Lyft drivers and others in the gig economy, from food and package delivery to charging for Bird. And I'm really excited for today's panel. So without further ado, I think I'm going to call my fellow panel members onto the stage. Should I scoot over? So we've got a good panel today. I'm really excited. We've got the future of ride-hail and shared mobility, and I think we've got an eclectic group. So I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves, maybe a quick 30 to 60 seconds about who they are and what they do in their company. We can start with you, Mark, if that, or maybe we can start with Gina over on the end, if that works.
Welcome. I'm Gina Fiandaca. I am representing the City of Boston as its Transportation Commissioner. We have had a keen interest in shared mobility for quite some time. Under the purview of the Transportation Department is all things related to moving around the city, whether it's a ride share or bike share or a car share. Anything to do with infrastructure and transportation management, and I am so interested to hear what my fellow panelists have to say.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lily Rudis. I am from VIA. VIA is a developer and operator of on-demand transit systems. We started in New York City as a transportation network company, and in the past 3 years or so have been taking the technology that we've optimized, developing a shared ride system that works really well for New York, and applying it to new contexts. So my role at VIA is to work with cities and public transit agencies to find ways to make their public transit better with our on-demand transit technology.
Thank you very much. My name is Pras, and I'm with the Toyota Mobility Foundation, specifically looking at Asia-Pacific region. Maybe not many of you, most of you know Toyota, but maybe not the Toyota Mobility Foundation. It's a foundation that basically looks at trying to move more people to more places. Fundamentally, what we do is we look at problems that are either caused by mobility or that can be solved by mobility. So there are many issues that are caused by mobility, too much mobility. We have congestion issues in certain places. We have to look at safety, we have to look at pollution, we have to look at these kind of issues. Or on the other side, there are people who don't have sufficient mobility, the elderly population or people with disabilities, and we try to see look for solutions as well. I specifically lead the team for Asia Pacific. We have a global team as well, so I look forward to sharing some of our insights in terms of what we've learned and what we can share with all of you. Thank you.
Super. Yeah, my name is Mark Thomas. I head up alliances and marketing for a company called RideCell. RideCell makes a platform for new mobility. So we are a cloud for car sharing and ride sharing, and really focus on helping companies that are now increasingly interested in getting into new mobility, car sharing and ride sharing, by offering them a complete cloud platform to get into the business. So we're based in San Francisco, and the name RideCell actually means get a ride with your cell phone. So we've focused on that since 2009.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all of those quick introductions. And like I said, I think we've got a great mix here because, you know, Mark with RideCell, I think working with the operators and car sharing. And Praz, I think your international experience will be really interesting. And this panel is on the future of ride hail and shared mobility, but I think before we look into the future, I kind of want to take a quick look at the past. And in my eyes, obviously, I'm a little biased working so much with Uber and Lyft and Via and these other ride hail companies. I think that this has been one of the modes, that has really kind of been started some of this mobility revolution we've seen, right? Uber and Lyft, taxis were around for 100 years. Uber and Lyft come along, and the whole game has changed. So, Gina, I'm curious to know from you, sort of, what impact do you think ride hail has had on your business and the way that you look at things? What can we learn from this explosion of ride hail, really?
Sure. Well, the explosion of ride hail has certainly filled gaps in our transit system, and it certainly highlighted the fragility of our transit system, that there's a need out there and a desire for folks to move around in different ways, and everyone wants that choice. And that was sort of been an impetus for the city of Boston to look at what's our transit system look like, and who are we serving, and how can we best serve them through a variety of options. TNCs came onto the scene, and they filled that need, and they sort of highlighted for us that there are a lot of populations in the city of Boston that want to move around in different ways. Our role is really to ensure that there's some equity to it all, and that there's a sort of that everyone has the same opportunity to use it. TNCs have certainly filled that role in a large capacity, and they've sort of pushed us in the way to figure out how do our blue bikes complement gaps in transit, how does ride share complement gaps in transit, shared mobility in other ways, but really it's all about who are we serving and how do we best serve them. And I think what we see with this panel here, that there's an unprecedented level of sort of public-private partnership. When TNCs come to us and they say, this is where we want to be and this is how we want to serve your customers, that's really a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone else wants to jump in, feel free. Otherwise, I'll move on to my next question.
Yes, I'll just jump in quickly. I think Gina identified, very well, in fact, that the TNCs have, in a way, identified a latent demand for rides that already existed. So when Uber and Lyft came on the market, it was very, very apparent that there were lots of rides that, in many cases transit wasn't serving, or in some cases rides that people were previously taking with their personal vehicles and would prefer to take with a ride hail system, coming home from the bar at night, for example. I think, that is an incredible innovation, and it has shown the opportunity for these kinds of systems. And I think, rightly, Gina, also you focused that on the fact that shared mobility is going to be extremely important to the future of transportation. So I think, we at VIA, from our perspective, we think that, this amazing innovation already exists, and now the challenge to us is how to make it really efficiently shared so that, the road space is being utilized really effectively.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think it is, I've definitely heard people say that they see, ride-hail companies specifically as competitors to public transportation, but I actually think that's dead wrong. I think they're anything but competitors. I think they can be very complementary, and in some cases, I know VIA has been exploring a lot of public-private partnerships. Do you want to highlight, I know that we chatted about a few. Do you want to highlight one that you think might be a good example of that, Lily?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we have now taken this technology that we developed in our consumer services that aggregates people who are heading in the same direction and have started to apply it to public transit. So we have now partnered, I think one example that's really cool is with the city of Arlington. The city of Arlington, Texas had the not so nice distinction of being the largest city in the United States without a formal public transportation system. The people of Arlington were often voting down measures to improve public transit, and the bus that existed before was a simple connection between the regional rail station and downtown Arlington. The city of Arlington is in fact pretty forward-thinking when it comes to these things, and they put out an RFP for an on-demand solution. So for the last year or so, we have in fact been operating a VIA-style service that was, is driven by our contractor drivers. We provided the vehicles through our partnership with Mercedes-Benz, and of course the technology that aggregates passengers who are requesting rides and heading in similar directions, and deployed the solution as public transportation in Arlington. So it's co-branded with the city. We've did the whole service design with the city, but we are operating a VIA service as public transit in Arlington, Texas. And I think we would welcome opportunities to find places that would be interested in replicating that kind of model.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. And I mean, everyone okay back there? So I think definitely, the term shared mobility services, I'm curious to know, Mark, how do you define or how do you look at, this sort of shared nature of these services?
Yeah, it's interesting. So shared mobility has a couple things in common. One of the biggest things is that each vehicle or mode of transportation is used by multiple people in a single day. So when you see announcements that automotive OEMs are getting into subscription services and people come to me, it's like, isn't this great? This is shared mobility. Well, on average, a vehicle is used 4% of the time. And so if you have that vehicle for 3 years or you change it for a new one every month in a subscription service, it's still not shared mobility. In fact, it's moving in the other direction of, those services are generally more expensive. When we think and talk a lot about shared mobility, I know there's a lot of debate that says, well, can I completely commit to shared mobility and get rid of my car? And I think in the developed world, it's seen as a car replacement. But Gina, as you were mentioning, I think that in the same way, in the developing world, people may not necessarily have the economic resources to have their own car, and this technology is what sort of democratizes access to vehicles, being able to use and pay for a vehicle by the minute or by the mile. In the same way that we viewed our cell phones when they first came out as something to enhance our home line. In much of Asia, they were the first time people got connected. They didn't have the landlines run to their homes. So when we think about this panel as the future of shared mobility, you have to look at it in the context of the three major disruptions that are taking place: autonomous, on-demand, and electric. And it's these three disruptions together that come together that will be enough to dramatically change the economics of using shared mobility. And when it becomes twice as cheap to use a shared vehicle than use your own, that's the point. It becomes this tipping point. And in the same way that probably none of us are out buying CDs and DVDs anymore, we're pushing a button and listening to Spotify. If we can push a button and get a ride for half the cost of owning our own car, that's the real power of this transformation. That's when a third of all passenger miles in the next 10 years will be done in shared mobility.
Can I add a couple of comments to that? First of all, the title of this particular panel, called The Future of Ride-Hailing and Ride-Sharing, is of course interesting, but I want to talk a bit about even the past of ride-hailing and ride-share. Actually, shared mobility is not new at all. It's been existing for centuries. I mean, since the time of mobility, if I take especially, based where I am in Asia, the Asian context, everything was shared. It was all about social cohesion. These are agrarian societies where your food was shared often, your clothes were shared between your families and your cousins, and even mobility very frequently was you would get on some form of mobility. It could be a truck or a bullock cart or something else to take you to the city. So it's actually existed for a very long time. The thing that has changed or kind of taken the next step is actually getting onto a vehicle which you do not know of. So the trust element, how do you actually get into the trust element of the shared mobility? And this becomes quite an interesting aspect that needs to be considered. And actually, one of the key triggers where you are talking about the advancement is really more in terms of the cell phone or smart phones, where you start getting to know who the person is. You have some form of evaluating them, and then you have some way of actually sharing the cost or giving some kind of additional benefit from that. So shared mobility is actually, it's a very old concept. I just wanted to mention that. And the fact is, it's more about how do we expand the kind of circle of trust among different people to utilize a particular form of mobility. The other small point, if I can just add, is everyone talks about shared mobility, but mobility is actually nothing but a means to an end. why do people move is probably the more important thing. People move for education, for employment, for entertainment, for healthcare. So the purposes of why people move are actually kind of the key trigger. And then you have to think about what is the most efficient or optimal form of getting to that particular place. And sharing could be one of the options that is made available. But certain people may talk about, with my children, I want to utilize a particular form of mobility. If I'm on my own, I want to utilize another form of mobility. And the beauty, I think, of the connected services that we have right now is it gives you the option to choose what is the most optimal form of mobility for that purpose. So I think that's kind of one of the keys that we should consider.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think in that context, it makes a lot of sense. And, I think with one of the most exciting things about the prospect of this shared mobility in the future is, what a lot of the panels so far and a lot of the discussion has revolved around. I think I've heard the statistics about the cars, 4 or 5 times now, and, that they're only utilized a few percentage points of the time, and all of these different statistics. But I think as a combination of public transportation and ride hail and car share and autonomous in the future, that's what really enables people to get over that hump of car ownership. And I think one thing that you said, Mark, that was interesting was that there's 2 ways to look at it. You can look at it from the point of view of someone who owns a car today, and you're trying to convince them that they can use these shared mobility services and replace their car. Or on the equity piece, Gina, for someone who doesn't own a vehicle today, you can actually sort of recreate what it's like to own a car by providing them these different services at different price points.
Well, that's a great point. And in Boston, a couple of years ago, we launched a program called Drive Boston. And that was specifically to identify areas in the city where we could provide car share opportunities. And it worked out to be a great model for sort of shared mobility in general, where we really wanted to encourage providers to provide car share in areas of the city that were underserved, that really didn't have a great access to transit, a reliable, efficient transit, and were underserved by car share. And so we did that. And they came back to us and they said, well, here's the data, and that was another great example of how we shared some information to help us both make decisions. And it turned out that a lot of those locations were actually in some areas of the city, in some of our neighborhoods that didn't have car share. So they wanted to expand in those areas. The side benefit to that was that it really helps to break down neighborhood boundaries. And it sort of unlocks the opportunities that you were talking about, Mark, that it brought people from Roxbury and Mattapan and areas of the city to South Boston, to Jamaica Plain, to downtown Boston, in a way that they sort of didn't experience their own city before. So those are the types of things that we're looking for.
Yeah, so I'm curious to know, how some of these services might be working together, car sharing and ride hailing. Mark, I know you guys have done some work sort of on the 2 of those. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. A big part of shared mobility is figuring out ways to increase the utilization of the vehicles themselves. The more they're on the road, the more they're being used, just the more efficient economic use of resources. And certainly if you're a mobility service operator, one of your goals is not just a public good, but how do I get an ROI? So taking, for instance, the car sharing model, typically the demand for car sharing during a work week is during the middle of the day. And it's easier to find parking. People are using it to run their errands. And then in the evening, they'd much prefer to take a ride share. So if you can take that fleet of vehicles you own and have them used for car sharing and then have some percentage used for ride sharing, you can get much more utilization out of the entire experience. And plus, what you'll get is you'll start to develop your customer base to think of you not just as a place to get a car I can drive, but a place that I can get a ride. Because the pot of gold here is autonomous ride hailing. And when that market takes off, that's where, some estimates are that'll be worth $9 trillion of market cap 10 years from now. So, companies that get in the business today to do car sharing, learn how to operate a fleet of vehicles, own them, keep them clean and maintained, add drivers to them, those are the companies that'll be very well positioned. Like if you are in Seattle or Portland, you should definitely try the Reach Now service by BMW. And it's a great example of one of the first apps that I know of that you can use the app and either reserve a car that you drive yourself or get a ride.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even if you look at some of the offerings on the Uber app in San Francisco, for example, you can now order a scooter, you can get a jump bike, you can order an Uber X or an Uber Select or an Uber Black, you can even rent a car share through Get Around. So they are seeming to aggregate a lot of these different options in one platform. And then, of course, there's third parties doing it on their own too, right?
Maybe just to add a bit in terms of maybe, again, the Asian context, I think the way that the different forms of mobility are starting to work together, we, as the Toyota Mobility Foundation, we've been encouraging especially the integration between public transport and a lot of these ride-hail, ride-share partners. Because one of the issues that always existed was they always felt that they were competing against each other, going to your point earlier. But once the government also kind of recognized that they have some capacity constraints in terms of the investment costs, so they would, of course, make the public transport from point A to point B. But we kind of utilize different ride-hail, ride-share partners, which could be three-wheelers or two-wheelers, as well as cars, to try and get the actual public transport to extend. And then we're trying to work with now single ticketing apps or single kind of integrated payment systems, which allow these to work far better. I think one of the critical elements that need to be understood is really the single payment or the single ticketing application side of it, which is kind of critical to make them work well.
Yeah, I'm curious, Pras, to ask you, because I think a year ago, if you guys attended LA CoMotion last year, there were no bird scooters, there were no Lime scooters. I think they actually just started right around November, December of last year. And this year, it's a whole different story if you've been over to the west side of Los Angeles. I'm curious to know if there are, I don't think anyone really predicted this other than maybe someone at Bird. But Pras, I'm curious to know, in the Asian market, there's some different modes and some other modes that are pretty popular that aren't nearly as popular here. Is there anything that you could see in the future that would work here very well?
So I think it kind of goes also to Mark's point where we're talking about connected but also electrified and shared mobility. Considering the grid, considering the possibilities of what can be done, especially within the either the electricity constraints or the connectivity constraints in Asia Pacific, there's a lot more of two-wheeler, three-wheeler kind of connectivity. So you have bikes that are, very typically from the railway stations or bus stations that take you to your first mile or last mile kind of option. But the amazing thing is that the asset, of course, has to be utilized. Just on the ride-hailing or the ride-sharing itself, they are not particularly profitable, to be very frank. They do not make money. They are all losing money.
I think Uber announced yesterday that they lost over $1 billion last quarter.
So they are all losing significant amounts of money. So the way to kind of cover that is to be able to utilize the asset for other purposes. So what's been working very well, especially in Asia, and I'm sure over here as well, is to use it for food delivery. And it's become kind of a, the same Grab or Gojek, which are the kind of primary players in Asia Pacific, all have the same, they bought over food delivery companies. They also do things like they take people, massage people to an area. They bring barbers to your house where they cut your hair. So it's all kind of integrated. Now it's supposed to be the same ride-share platform, but you can get a haircut, you can get a maid to come to your house, you can get a driver to come and pick you up for an hour. They do all of these kind of services integrated within the same ride-share program.
Yeah, and I think the key point is the increasing the utilization, right? Like Mark and Pras talked about. And I know, Lily, with VIA, that's sort of one of the areas that you guys specialize in the kind of shared, that's sort of how the company was, a big focus at the start, right? Actually sharing rides and making people walk a block or two to get their ride instead of it coming right to their doorstep, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. So when Via launched, it launched in fact as a corner-to-corner service, which allowed us to pick up passengers in the direction of travel and sort of keep everyone in the vehicle on a very efficient route from point A to point B, which means that during rush hour in our busier markets, we can put up to 6 or 7 people in the same vehicle, and no individual passenger is taken on a detour of more than a couple minutes, really. So we've run the analyses and have found that, in fact, Via rides are about as fast as taxis, but we can have this vehicle utilization, especially in busy times of day, that is very, very high and sort of more in line with public transportation, something like a small bus, than typically what might be considered ride hailing. I think to your points, Mark and Pros, like the really interesting question is how we can leverage these technologies, these private companies that are working to make the technology extremely efficient and make it work for the public sector as well. So we're talking about ways in which all these different platforms can utilize resources more efficiently, but the entity that is overseeing all of this is in fact the public transit agencies and the cities themselves, who are trying to provide the absolute best mobility for all of their citizens and do it in an equitable way. And I don't claim to have the answer, but I think it's a really interesting question to talk about the role that government should in fact be playing in developing this basically mobility as a service vision that we're all kind of talking about here, in which all of the different modes are integrated with one another. One can look on a single app and find out the best way or the easiest way or the most scenic way or the cheapest way to get from point A to point B. But the fundamental question, I think, still is which of these modes and what combination of them provides the most mobility to all people of the city or of a suburban community or of a rural community, and what are the roles that the private sector should play in working with the public sector to define the best way to do that.
Anyone have anything else to add?
Maybe just another point, just to talk about the fact that when we talk about the options that people should have, there's so many factors that influence that. It could be the weather. For example, in Thailand, it rains a lot, so then people want a particular form of transportation. In certain other places, they may take a different form of transportation. Depending on the age of the person, they may want something that's easy to get on and get off. I think we need to really understand that a lot of these situations, also the cultural aspects are quite different about safety, about culture, about women going on their own versus, with a family. So in that context, I think, especially in terms of shared mobility or looking at this entire space, localized solutions become quite key. So you need to understand the culture, and maybe in city by city, you will have quite a unique approach of handling rideshare. It may be the same company, but they need to localize in order to be successful within that context.
So I sort of have an open-ended question right now that I'm curious to know about. Is the future of shared mobility, is it getting people out of personal vehicle ownership? I mean, is that sort of what we're all working towards? Is that a common goal between everyone on this panel?
Yeah, certainly when we think of shared mobility, it's not just about one person sharing a car and then the next person sharing a car. It's about multiple people sharing it when it's a vehicle. And when you think today, I mean, I think most people think, well, autonomous Uber is just a car without the driver. But once you get into this autonomous world, shared mobility can really become shared in that you can divide the passenger cockpit into individual seats where you can, have a conference call and actually it feels like your own car, even though it's shared. If everybody just has their own car, we'll end up with traffic Armageddon. These things have to be designed to have multiple people in them. And once you get to the point where people are finding it's more convenient and faster and cheaper to take shared mobility, and your car sits in the garage with a battery tender on it, when your lease is up or when you've decided, why am I spending money on this? You'll be fully committed to shared mobility before you realize that car is now in the same category as the box of CDs that's somewhere stuck in the corner of your garage.
So I would say shared mobility is here. Shared mobility has always been here. That's what transit is, public transit, in a way, right?
That's sort of what I was thinking.
But I think that, from sort of a public policy perspective, that there's a value in the socialization of shared commutes and sort of sharing your ride with someone. And I think that maybe it's what Pras was talking about, that it's sometimes a cultural aspect to it. A lot of us grew up the first or second generation of immigrants, and we're used to sharing. I come from one of 7, so we learned to share at a young age, and we learned that you probably didn't get anything firsthand, and it wasn't yours for very long. But I think that there's a value in the socialization and the social aspect of having a shared economy.
Well, I guess I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because do you think people really want to share, though? I mean, I know when Uber and Lyft drivers, they do not like shared rides. They complain, more work, more hassle, less money. I would even argue that a lot of Uber pool passengers don't like sharing the rides. They typically choose it because it's cheaper, because of the cost. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, folks want safe, reliable, equitable transportation options. Sometimes they might want to share a ride, and sometimes they might not want to. But I think at the end of the day, everyone wants that opportunity to choose how they get around.
I might add to that I think maybe it would be important also to focus on sort of the trade-off between the undeniable convenience of taking a ride by yourself or driving your own vehicle, and sort of our social responsibility to not do that anymore. I think we all recognize that single occupancy vehicles are bad for cities, they're bad for the environment, and even though it might be very fun to turn your music up all the way or listen to your own podcast and not have to deal with anyone else. I think it is very important to think about the balance between what is the responsibility when it comes to transit for society as a whole, and how can you balance that best without sacrificing convenience. And I think these various kinds of shared mobility options are actually getting to a point where we have extremely convenient and extremely comfortable shared mobility that is still more efficient than owning your own car.
I think everyone here in this room probably shares that goal, but do you think we're the typical consumer who, when I'm driving for Uber in Los Angeles, they get in and put their headphones in, and that signals to me that they don't want to talk, they want to do their own thing, they want to be on the phone?
Well, I mean, I hope we're doing a good job of evangelizing this message so that more people come over to our side. I think everyone feels the pain of being in traffic. Everyone definitely feels the pain of pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, not all equally, but everyone does, in fact, in the end. So I think if, we're able to make our message successful, then hopefully it's not worth it to sort of be in your own little pod for that time when you think about the consequences of that.
I just think that maybe Harry's question was particularly aimed at me because he maybe knows that Toyota pays my check at the end of the day. So whether people actually go out in terms of stopping to use their private cars or not, I think it's more really about the consumer and what they would finally choose. But one thing that needs to be understood is that at the moment there are 7 billion people. By 2050, there are going to be 9 billion people around the world. So 9 billion people with multiple needs will all have to do some form of mobility to get from place A to place B, either for education or employment or trade or something. So you're required to provide them with the option, and it has to be, as was mentioned by Gina as well as Lily, it has to be something that is efficient, but it has to be comfortable. It has to be the optimal solution. And I think, of course, in terms of electrification, I think basically the industry is also already moving in that space. We already see certain aspects in terms of connectivity that's already coming into place. I think the sharing will take place in certain aspects, but it's not necessarily something that can be imposed because people have to choose whether they want to do that. Again, taking the Asian example, it's aspirational for poor people when they kind of get to the point where they have some money, they want to get a bike. When they have little more money, they want to get a small car. When they have more money, they want to get a big car. This is part of the aspirational journey as well. It gives them the freedom and independence. I don't think we can tell them, no, you can't have that. It is up to them to determine. But if the option is better, naturally people will take the better option. And that's how I think eventually people are going to start moving in that direction. Public transport, I still think, is probably the optimal form of mobility. That is the most efficient form, and the rest of it has to fit into that space.
Yeah, I think if we define better, that means different things to different people. And as much as we think, yes, people are socially responsible and want shared mobility, there was an eye-opener for me when Tim Higgins wrote an article about shared mobility in the Wall Street Journal, and there was over 1,000 comments, 90% of which could have been a gun control debate. You'll take my truck steering wheel out of my cold, dead hands. And there was just a
heated
huge
steering wheels now.
amount of passion towards the, their vehicle is their freedom. And, the way I see it, not having a vehicle is freedom when there's all sorts of options that I can use that aren't going to, have me spend a lot more money. But, I think that, maybe the trend that people are going to be moving more to the cities, so those, 9 billion people, 66% of them will be living in cities, and that makes for a very different transportation experience than people commuting in from outlying suburbs. So, the increasing density of work, education, fun all taking place will also, mean that shared mobility has increased because it's just so much expensive to use the real estate for your car.
I think just maybe a small point adding on to that. One of the critical issues is when we talk about mobility, but it's really about city planning. At the end of the day, how do we actually design cities to make it more optimal for people to achieve whatever their purpose is? Then the mobility comes after, in some ways. We've of course designed it backwards, but now we have to retrofit the solution.
So I'm looking into a very bright light right now, but I think I got the sign that there's one question left. So I think what I want to end with is kind of an open-ended question to the panel. So what are some lessons we've learned from the explosion of ride-hail? What should we look out for in the future with these new modes and this new future of shared mobility? What are the potential downsides that we might want to avoid so that we don't make the same mistakes, or so that we kind of achieve our goals and don't just look for we obviously there's a lot of potential upside, but as we've seen that sometimes too much of a good thing can be bad. We're seeing this with some of the congestion issues with ride hail that cities are facing now. So I'm curious to know, what should we look out for in the future? Who wants to go first?
Well, one thing that I think we should look out for in the future is to start the conversations early, to start the community conversations early, but also to start the conversations with our private sector partners. The public-private partnership model is a great way of bringing services to the public. And the earlier you start those conversations and identify how you're serving the needs of your constituencies, the better.
Yeah, I think we haven't talked about it yet in this session, but either the greatest success factor or the greatest impediment to successful new mobility is state and local government. And if you look at a city like Madrid, which said we want e-vehicles, free parking for all e-vehicles. If you want to make them shared, you don't need a permit. Oh, and we're going to have a section of town where you can only drive through it with an e-vehicle. The public use of e-vehicles in that city has skyrocketed. They get used more than 10 times a day. Then even where I live in San Francisco, free-floating car sharing's illegal. And so there is no option to set up a service that's like Drive Now or Car2Go within the city of San Francisco. Berkeley and Oakland and Alameda and those cities have permits that allow one of our customers, Gig, to operate there. But so a city can make or break public acceptance through insight and foresight.
Maybe from my side, I think one of the things that we need to look out for is in this entire journey as we move forward on shared mobility or ride-hailing, there will be winners and there will be losers. The question is, how can we make sure that we are able to look after the losers as well? There are people who may actually end up losing jobs. There are people, employment, there's an economic component to it. So we must understand all of these elements. When we talk about equity, it cannot be completely seen from a perspective of just, we have to encourage this, but we have to try to have a more balanced kind of and broader perspective. So as Gina said, I think it's really about understanding the risks and the opportunities and making sure that the relevant players are around the table to find solutions for it.
I think those are all great points. The only thing I would add is that I don't think we should discount these kinds of mobility in suburban and rural areas as well. VIA has started to experiment with services that operate in much, much less dense areas, and so far those services have been extremely successful. And I think it comes down to some of the things that we've talked about on the stage today, which is if you're able to provide an option that is more convenient and sort of cost competitive with driving your own vehicle, even if you take a ride-hail option that has a 15-minute wait time, which would sort of be unheard of in LA or New York, if you are, for example, in the County Kent in Sittingbourne, where in rural England, where VIA has a service, you're probably willing to wait those extra few minutes if it means you can leave your car at home. So I think, as we look into the future, it'll be important to think about how we can actually deploy shared mobility options in all sorts of contexts, because I think these technologies are really valuable, and not only in our densest cities.
That's a great point, and I think a great way to end the panel. So one last thanks to everyone on the panel. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.